In the year 1949, there was a trial of Japanese war criminals. The importance of this event was not inconsiderable, since the trial received the unofficial name Amur Nuremberg for a reason. The people responsible for creating and controlling the activities of the most sinister bacteriological weapons research center were tried. Many thousands of people were tortured alive over the years of the laboratory's existence in inhumane experiments aimed at creating deadly viruses and infections. The defendants received quite significant sentences. However, not all war criminals were represented at the trial. Some were tried earlier, while others managed to escape justice, such as General Shiroishi, the famous chief ideologist of Unit 731, who was the developer of these deadly viruses. But in addition to the laboratories, Japan also had concentration camps where torture of prisoners was practiced on a large scale. Those responsible for these evils were also caught and prosecuted whenever possible. Let us tell you about specifics of Japanese cruelty. In the movie Shogun, there is an episode when a Japanese warlord, Shogun himself, brings an English sailor to a Japanese village and instructs the villagers to teach the Englishman the Japanese language so that he could speak it fluently and no worse than the Japanese themselves. The time limit was 6 months, after which the sailor had to pass an exam. If he failed, the entire village was to be destroyed. This demonstrative episode very accurately depicts the basics or the essence of Japanese ideology. The Japanese are a very strict and disciplined people who do not tolerate any deviations. Strict obedience to orders, punishment for the slightest fault or disobedience is a common thing. It is clear that in treating their own population with such indifference, the Japanese were 10 times harsher on their enemies. It is sufficient to say that the country of the rising sun flatly refused in 1929 to sign the Geneva Convention governing the humane treatment of prisoners of war. The proud samurai simply could not comprehend the overall concept of mercy for their enemy. For them, there were only 2 options with regard to the enemy: either kill or torture to death. Death camps. When anyone speaks about concentration camps, the camps in Nazi Germany come to mind first. Plague-ridden barracks, gas chambers, endless screaming and crying of the tortured, all of this was there. But not only in the territory under the control of the Third Reich. The Japanese concentration camps were probably even worse, anyways more gruesome for sure. The Japanese are masters of torture, many kinds of which they have carried through the centuries. During the trials, numerous photographs were shown of those who had been released from these camps. The appearance of the people was frightening. They were terribly thin, many had no arms or legs, and almost all were dressed in some rags, a scene not for the faint-hearted. And when the unfortunates began to tell others what kind of abuse they had been subjected to, even the veteran soldiers' jaws dropped. The ex-prisoners, out of habit, called the names of their jailers in whispers, their eyes instinctively blinking in fear, for there were some monsters among them who devised such perverse acts that the first thing that came to mind was doubt as to their adequacy. One of the most popular tortures was the water torture. The prisoner's stomach was filled with water through a hose and then violently jumped on his stomach. Very few survived, as numerous internal injuries and muscle injuries occurred, inevitably leading to death, but extremely painful one. Beating a prisoner to death was also quite common. An overwhelming number of sadistic warders did this. It is pretty fair to say that many of them were captured, convicted and executed after the war. The construction of the railroad. Imprisoned people were actively used as cheap labor on large-scale construction sites. We can even say that every self-respecting historian knows very well what the road of death is. The railroad that was built in the territory of modern Myanmar without any exaggeration on the human bones. According to different data, from 30 to 40,000 people were brought for the construction of the giant, by those days' standards, road, and no less than 10,000 of them died there. The Japanese supervisors mocked the prisoners to no avail, loading them with crippling standards and severely punishing them if they failed to meet them. Living conditions were also brutal, with people living almost outdoors because the skinny straw huts with no bedding could not be called even close to resembling housing. People were constantly sick, and in addition, poor nutrition worsened their well-being and weakened their immune system, which contributed to serious inflammation even with small illnesses. The most common sickness was rotting of the limbs. The rapidly developing gangrene left people incapacitated. The Japanese approached the matter with their usual simplicity. A leg was immediately amputated in complete unsanitary conditions, and then the unfortunate invalid was left on his own. If he could work again, he worked. If he could not, on the other hand, he slowly died of exhaustion. In addition to this main line, thousands of other POWs and simply captured civilians served in Japanese factories and construction sites. One thing was common to all of them: inhuman treatment by the guards, bordering on animalistic and beyond animalistic. Manchurian Laboratory. The bacteriological weapons produced in the laboratory were intended primarily for use on Soviet prisoners. Shiroishi himself spoke about this. He said this: "In a war with the USSR, given the present state of military forces, the first front line will probably be broken quickly. Therefore, we will have to retreat with our headquarters to the Tonghua area, take our detachments to the rear, and shorten the front line. In the light of this, we must be ready to make a bacteriological offensive after the Soviet army marches into Manchuria. Our branches in the field must study the methods of spreading bacteria in populated areas by partisan methods of fighting." There was not much time to create those viruses, so experiments were conducted 24 hours a day, and thousands of people were killed. The plan was for a colossal fallout of all kinds of infections from Manchuria to the Soviet Union in 1945. Other crimes. The Japanese torture methods were also sophisticated in that they legally published pamphlets with detailed instructions on how to properly conduct torture so that a person would experience the absolute maximum amount of suffering. The following recommendations are known: to make the prisoner sit upright and motionless, to put the interrogator down and stomp on his ankles, to place him under a shelf that is at such a height that the prisoner cannot possibly stand upright. Or recommendations as such are also known. An extremely effective method of interrogation is water torture. You must put the prisoner on his back, fix his arms and legs, and drip water into his nose and mouth at the same time. Those prisoners who were of no interest to the Japanese as informants could be considered simply lucky. They were simply destroyed. For those who were enslaved by the descendants of the samurai, a quick death was almost a luxury. By the end, we can say just one thing: it is hard to imagine what awful consequences the world would have had if all the Japanese plans had come to reality. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe and leave a like.